If Shadows of the Empire impressed me as an early N64 title, nothing could prepare me for the moment I got my hands on Star Wars Rogue Squadron. After months of magazine previews, dazzling screenshots, and more hype than any other game bar Zelda, I finally picked it up from my local game store. To this very day, I remember calling the store at 9 AM like I did every Saturday, asking what new releases were in stock that weekend, and after months of me and my brother asking when we would have Rogue Squadron, we finally had it. We rode our bikes through the cold snow that winter's morning and dumped them outside as we went inside. Our local game store was no bigger than 300 square feet, so it would often be crowded, but I pushed my way to the front and right away the owner knew why I was there. Rogue Squadron started life in quite an unusual way. LucasArts were looking at ideas for its next Star Wars game to follow up from Shadows of the Empire. They looked at a new game engine which Factor 5 were developing for a large-scale terrain and decided to use this due to their great relationship in the past. Listening to gamers' feedback from Shadows of the Empire, many players stated that they loved the Battle of Hoth mission, so why not make a full game like that? Bill Tosti, production manager for Rogue Squadron, said that the mission was in fact the genesis for the whole of Rogue Squadron. Factor 5 pitched a concept where they would take missions from the movies which were fans' favourite scenes from the Star Wars movies. Surprisingly, Lucasfilm were not willing to allow games to draw directly from the movies, so rejected this idea. Factor 5 also wanted to make Wedge Antilles the main character, however Lucasfilm suggested giving gamers a more important character from the movies. It was proposed that Luke Skywalker would be the main character in the new game and that Wedge would also be a minor playable character. Back at the drawing board, and Factor 5 came across the Rogue Squadron series of comics which was set during the years of the original film trilogy. Using the comics as a guide, Factor 5 set about creating a game with a similar setting, including characters everyone knew from the movies. The project was green-lit, and the rest is just gaming history. In terms of gameplay, Rogue Squadron is an action arcade space combat game. If like me you played the Sublime X-Wing series on PC, it may take you a little while to get used to the style of gameplay that Rogue Squadron offers. Whereas X-Wing on the PC offered more of a simulation-based approach, Rogue Squadron is an all-out action fest. Taking place across 16 levels in 3 chapters, Rogue Squadron has 4 main mission types. Firstly, you have Search and Destroy, which are my personal favourite, where you're given set targets in which you need to take down by the end of the mission. Reconnaissance missions see you having to locate key Empire targets and vital information in order to understand plans which are taking place. Rescue missions are fast-paced and usually involve a raid on an enemy area where you must release prisoners or a key character from the movies. And finally, there are Protect missions, where you're giving a rebel base or vehicle which you need to fend off attacks against. One of the coolest things about Rogue Squadron is that each of the 16 missions are broken down into sub-missions while you play. Not only this, but the sub-missions also vary, so in the space of a single level you can find yourself attacking an Empire base while then having to rescue a rebel commander when things turn sour. It's this mix of styles which means that the game is always keeping you on your toes. You may think you have a mission almost complete, and then suddenly you will be ambushed and need to dogfight your way out of a sticky situation. There are times when you will need to go all guns blazing, but other times you'll need to fly low and avoid detection as you take out satellites scanning for your location. Each of the levels feels like a great thought went into it, and how it plays is most important, and it is actually fun. Some of the levels are incredibly challenging, but it has that magic that keeps you coming back to it just to give it one more go until you lose all of your lives. Graphically, the game is quite simply one of the best looking N64 games you'll ever find, but it could have been a much different story. You see, Star Wars Rogue Squadron was one of the first N64 games to use the expansion pack to offer high resolution graphics, bumping the resolution up to 640 by 480 from the usual 320 by 240. Factor 5 had to appeal to Nintendo in order to let them use the expansion pack to support the high-res mode they wanted to implement into the game. Few people know, but the expansion pack was never designed to be used in this way. It was originally going to be used to support hardware peripherals, but after Nintendo saw what Acclaim was able to achieve in Turok 2 using the expansion pack, they gave Factor 5 the go-ahead. The high-res mode in Rogue Squadron for me made the expansion pack a must-have purchase. They improved the detail and it's incredible, and if any game shows the huge difference the expansion pack makes, then this is it. It's funny because my dad was always a critic of add-ons, and thinks they're just gimmicks, and I remember explaining to him what the expansion pack does. I'll never forget him telling me not to get it because it sounded like a con, but 5 minutes after showing him the improvements with and without the expansion pack, he was sold on it and couldn't believe how cool it was. Reviewers at the time oozed over how good the graphics were. The textures, landscapes, ships, and the real-time lighting effects are all greatly improved. I agree with many reviewers from the time that once you play this game with the expansion pack, it's near impossible to go back to playing it without it. For any Star Wars fan, you can spend countless hours just admiring the detail on the craft and locations. In levels from the movies, you can even fly to key locations, and it's this attention to detail that really helps the game stand out. If you're a Star Wars fan, then every few moments you'll be totally geeking out. I also loved how the game has so many varied locations. Some levels will see you conducting missions in murky swamps, whilst others you'll be surrounded by gorgeous clouds. There are even nighttime missions where the real-time lighting effects just look too advanced for what the N64 should be able to achieve. On the downside, some levels do have a fair share of fogging and draw distance issues. This is even with the expansion pack. Whilst it doesn't ruin the gameplay experience by any means, it can sometimes be annoying having to find an enemy by looking at the radar because you can't see it clearly on screen through the fogging. There is also the occasional slowdown when things get hectic on screen, but thankfully these moments are few and far between, and are mostly when there are larger enemies on the screen. The game, however, handles beautifully at all times. The game was also released on PC, however, having played both versions, it feels as if the game was perfectly designed and made for the N64. The analog stick controls your flight path, and each of the game's buttons has been perfectly crafted to be intuitive. The game's 5 main vehicles all have their own controls to learn, however they are quick to learn, and if you know the movies well, you know their strengths and weaknesses. They also all handle as you'd imagine, so the A-Wing is quick and nimble, but also fragile. In contrast, the Y-Wings are slow and heavy, but can take a heck of a lot of damage. There are also a choice of camera views to toggle through, however the camera on the default setting is near perfect, and this is actually one of the few N64 games where there can't be a single complaint about the game's camera. You may expect by now that I'm running out of things to praise about this game, but I haven't even started on the incredible sound yet. But like the graphics, there is also another cool story about this. Absolutely bizarrely, Lucasfilm were hesitant to let Factor 5 use the Star Wars library of sounds for the game. After many arguments, Lucasfilm eventually agreed to let them use a library of 22 kHz sounds and effects. This is half the standard rate, and the game's sound designer Rudolf Stembler rejected these and told Lucasfilm that they were worse than the temporary sound effects he had ripped from the VHS tape. So instead of using Nintendo sound drivers, Factor 5 developed their own tool called Mosis FX Sound. These drivers do use the N64 processor, but are half as taxing as the standard ones, and use advanced compression techniques. Due to this technical achievement, Star Wars Rogue Squadron has over 80 minutes of high quality stereo sound. Now aside from the technical information, the game actually sounds incredible. If you hook it up to a surround sound unit, you can hear exactly where enemies and shots are coming from. It will turn your room into a battleground and actually makes playing the game easier as you can locate enemies faster. The game also has a dynamic soundtrack, so when playing levels the music will alter dependent on whereabouts on the map you are. Take for example Tatooine, where the regular theme plays until you fly near Luke's home, where the music will gently transition into Luke's theme. I've said it before, but this is awesome level of fan service and attention to detail, and it's totally amazing. Add to this the fully voiced introductions to the missions and information about the craft you'll be flying makes this one of the best sounding N64 games to ever be released. Now one of the biggest criticisms of the game on its release was the lack of multiplayer. Some reviewers went as far as to call it criminal, but I think it's a huge exaggeration. To compensate for this, Factor 5 included a whole heap of additional secrets and extras. Firstly, every mission has an award scheme. Achieve certain criteria and you'll get gold, silver or bronze medals. Also, after completing missions you can replay them again, this time with a choice of craft instead of the single option you were presented with the first time around. There are also 3 bonus missions to unlock, which are all total fan service. There's a Tatooine race, which I remember from my old Rebel Assault days on the 3DO, and it now makes it look amazing. There's also the classic Death Star trench run and a remake of the Battle of Hoth. Adding to this, there are also some amazing Easter eggs which would even leave my buddy Chipsters the Easter egg hunter drooling over. There are the secret codes you can enter to unlock vehicles such as the Millennium Falcon, TIE Fighters, Interceptors and even a 1969 Buick Electra. However, when the Phantom Menace was released, the world got their first look at the Naboo starfighters. Factor 5, who were awaiting the movie's release, actually programmed in a secret code which unlocked the Naboo starfighters into Rogue Squadron. They released a secret code to coincide with the movie's release, and as a kid this totally blew my mind. At a time when most games had finished the game 100% and had already discovered all of Rogue Squadron's secret codes, it was just insane to think that they thought this far ahead and put this into the game. Star Wars Rogue Squadron is quite simply one of the best games on Nintendo 64. You don't have to be a Star Wars fan to admire its technical achievements, but if you are a fan, then this is perhaps the best Star Wars game on the console, and for me it's one of the best Star Wars games ever made. It's incredible to think that the game's producer Julian Eggebrecht couldn't believe how successful the game was. He said it sold around 100 times better than anybody had expected, and the game was in such high demand that media outlets were only given a single copy of the game instead of the industry standard 2 copies to have one as a spare. But the all-important question is, what does Rogue Squadron mean to you? Was this a day one pickup for you like it was for me, or were you weary of N64 Star Wars games after the mixed bag that was Shadows of the Empire? As always, let's kick off a discussion in the comments down below, and until next time, may the Force be with you.